Welcome everybody to the Konflux community call. Today is Thursday, October 23rd. Thank you for being here. By participating in the call, you are agreeing to the published community guidelines that we have in our community repo upstream. To kick things off, the KGC met yesterday. There are two ADRs. I believe both of them were atoms. We merged them both. We had a couple comments on them, but nothing was blocking. So we merged them and we closed out that milestone. So we'll continue to work through these ADRs as the weeks go by. After that, Barak, you have the first topic today, proxy configuration flags ADR.
Yeah, thanks. So it's not a big ADR. It's pretty small and simple. It's a follow-up to the general proxy ADR that we already merged a few weeks ago. It has to do with how exactly the users enable this for their pipelines. And we had a request to make this, to have this kind of, so besides creating a syntax for the users to configure things, we were asked to also have a kind of a big cluster-wide on-off switch to be able to switch this off if we see issues with it. And it also makes sense to have like a namespace-wide one, just for completeness sake, so to speak. So I won't go into all of the details. The ADR is good for that. But it's basically a couple of configuration maps and then some discussion about how to hook that into the pipelines. Please have a look and let's have the discussion there and iron out all the details if needed.
All right, thanks, Brock. We can get that added to the milestone, which closes in 2 weeks. So everybody else, please look at Brock's ADR. Provide comments before then, and we'll get it reviewed. Does anybody have questions for it right now? All right, Jens, you have a follow-up on the Rust builder image and Hermeto.
Yes, thank you. So just summing up, like the last time I was here and talking about that, the issue was that we are trying to have a newer Rust version for building applications in Konflux. RHEL has an old Rust version, and we do require for our dependencies in our own code newer Rust version to build. And so we achieved that by creating our own Rust builder image, which contains the most recent version of Rust, incrementally building up from the original RHEL provided version up to the most recent one. So that is what we have right now pushed to KIO. That is what we're using in our own application, our HTTPA for building. And like one final piece there is using Hermeto for prefetching dependencies, like our dependencies that we have. That also suffers from the fact that the Hermeto image has the older RHEL version of Rust, which has the older cargo version in there, which is not able to process the workspace, the Rust project, if the Rust version doesn't match up. So I think someone on this call mentioned that it would be okay, or it would be interesting for Konflux to actually take the Rust version that we are building and put that into the image of Hermeto in order to work around that issue. So that's basically like the follow-up here. We are at the stage that we have that image, and now we can find out how we make this happen.
Martin.
Oh, maybe Eric should go. Probably we will do the same update.
So how is who's going to maintain that kind of Rust build that is going to somehow end up in Hermeto?
Who's maintaining that? Did I get that right? That is a good question. So we do know that there's at least one other team at Red Hat who has interest in a more recent Rust version for building, somewhere in the AI area. So right now it's our team doing that. Hopefully in the future it will be more teams, or it will be like a shared effort. But as long as our product is alive, we will have to do that.
Right. We have discussed this in the past. So has there been any effort trying to contact the Rust team, within the company? If the company had this is a public call. If the company has a stake in this and needs a particular version of a particular tool chain inside one of its downstream products and builds, and has a team maintaining that project build as an RPM, has anyone who needs this, so in your team, for example, contacted that team and requested this kind of build to be published as a UBI container, or refreshed it in any shape or form? It can be just RPM. They don't necessarily have to build a container, just like Go tool sets.
So A, we are not building RPMs. We're building on a container. We're building using the upstream sources. B, we asked for updated Rust versions in RHEL, and that is a challenge because of all kinds of compatibility things that RHEL provides and that are not interesting for our product builds, but which is interesting for RHEL as a product. So there's like a kind of a misalignment, I guess. So if there's another way to, I don't know, publish this as an official builder image, I don't know about that. So right now we do not publish that build. We use that internally to build and then publish the result.
So, okay. So for what it's worth, it doesn't matter whether you're building RPMs or not. The end result is basically the same, whether it's a container image or RPM, because we somehow need to get it. So how would updating it work? I guess you would publish it to Quay somehow so that we can have a bot checking updates for the builds. So let's say, a new fresh build of a particular version of Rust is needed in Hermeto again. So how do we go about that?
So right now there is a Docker file that builds that. There's a one-line change that needs to be made in order to add a new version of Rust. So the second thing is that you have to specify the sources which come from the Rust project themselves, trigger a new build, rebuild the image, and then you have the most recent version in there.
Okay. So looking at the meeting notes, there is, can you actually add a link to where this is built to the agenda notes so that I can follow up later with this?
Yes, I can. This is an internal Konflux project.
Okay.
So I'm not sure. Like technically, I can.
No,
I'm not sure if it's okay.
Unless it's public, then we have to sort it out by a private channel.
And that I think is maybe a thing to pick up without committing to doing anything. Just try to imagine like where this like maybe should live or work. Like one version of this is maybe, Jens, we take wherever the Git repo is, where you've defined the container file and the Docker file and have onboarded it to build in a Konflux instance. And what if we moved that to the Konflux CI org, but we made your team maintainers of the image in code owners? The responsibility is clearly yours to maintain it, but we build it, we house the code in Konflux CI GitHub org, and we publish it to a Quay.io Konflux CI Rust builder image. That gets us somewhere. It kind of gets weird back on the Hermeto side. Like, Eric, I don't know how you think about it, that like, if should Hermeto be consuming Quay.io Konflux official builds?
No, so the reason why I asked, because so normally I would have expected that this like Jens already explained it, but back to my original question, whether this was asked from the Rust team we have in the company, and apparently there is no big interest because we don't need it in the product. So usually you get a builder image that ends up in the catalog, and you also get a newer version of RPM. So you get both. And we consume both. We consume RPMs, and whatever we cannot get from RPMs, we consume as layers from individual container images. But with Rust, and if I remember correctly, Ruby was another instance of that. It was extremely difficult to get it. That's why my question was, how do we actually consume it? Because I'm not sure we can do this with Rust. We were able to do it with JavaScript, Node.js, and we were able to do that with Go, because Go, since some version, probably 121, has been linked statically. So we can just copy out, the build out of the image. That's fine. But when you look at Rust, it has a ton of dynamic dependencies, libraries. So that's the essence of the question I had. How does Hermeto actually going to consume it if we do not get an RPM? Unless we want to, as part of our build, container build, want to rebuild the Rust from sources again.
So the final step in this whole Rust builder setup is like first running all the build, and then just creating from a fresh image, copying over the Rust toolchain onto the next image, without any dependencies that are like everything is statically linked, I think, except for OpenSSL or so.
Well, if it's statically linked, that's fine. But the usual upstream builds, if I recall correctly, they had a bunch of dynamic library dependencies which were incompatible with the base image we have.
No, because we are also just using the UBI base image plus the compiled version of the Rust compiler.
Like a nice test would be if you could build it on UBI 9 and see if you can copy it and use it on a UBI 10 image, just to make sure there's no other differences.
Okay.
That you'll probably
I'll
find
do that.
something.
I can try that. Yep.
Yeah, that would be nice. But as anything that is internal only, so we can follow up on that via private channel.
Just another question, Jens, would you want to be like tracking latest Rust in this image, or do you plan to pin to a certain version and wait and then bump kind of at your convenience? Like you could use Renovate to be continuously consuming commits that land on main in upstream Rust.
Okay, so we are only using released tarballs, so released versions of Rust, nothing in between. However, we also only plan for having a latest version of that container, which contains the latest released Rust version, comes out every 6 weeks or so. Mm-hmm. Because all the Rust versions, like the newer Rust versions, are guaranteed to be backwards compatible with the old code.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks, Jens. Is there anything else we want to discuss now? Or we'll just follow up?
I would like to raise some topic, if you don't mind. So I'm not sure if I should raise it because it is also being discussed elsewhere in ADR and other places. But we do have some concerns about how the plans for a new data model are shaping up right now, especially around how it's going to work, seems to be going to work with branches. And we've been attempting to kind of have the conversation for this in a couple of places, and we didn't really manage to get our concerns resolved. So I'm trying to raise this now and see if we can steer the direction in a useful direction. Basically, the topic has to do. So I'll start with, like, if you guys remember, I don't know if all of you were there, but we had a series of discussions about this topic in the beginning of the year or late last year, where one of the goals that was set forward for the new model is to facilitate handling branches better. Because what we have right now is that for every single new branch you create for a repo, you need to create a new component, probably a new application, and then link everything together. until the point where stuff starts running. And because of all of that, we also have a dedicated controller that tries to help you with it, which is called the project controller. And the new model, one of the aims there was to stretch components so they handle multiple branches. But at least the details I see in the ADR right now, and there are some other design docs that kind of go into more detail about it, include needing to specify each and every branch you need to work with in the component element. What this means is that from the user's point of view, the workflow does not change. Like when they branch the repo, they still need to go back to Konflux and change something, either directly in the API or the UI, to make it work with the new branch, which is exactly what we were hoping to be able to not have. So, and on the other hand, this new way of putting everything in the same custom resource would actually make it harder to have automation on top of it to kind of do the configuration for the user, because now you have multiple things that need to access the same shared resource and might have contention issues between them. So yeah, we've been trying to raise the discussion about this, but so far haven't seen a lot of positive action there.
Mm-hmm. Just in terms of status of documents, the ADR I created had very little detail. Gal asked for more detail before we go in, and so I put it in a draft, and I haven't looked back at it. So if there's been conversation there, I totally missed it. And but I think it's all in those design documents. I've been waiting for those to reach some state of maturity, and I'm going to copy paste them into the ADR for official review there. That's just from my point of view where I see status of stuff.
Yeah, so there's also a conversation to be had about whether we should do things in ADRs or in kind of those background documents, but I'm gonna try to put that topic aside for now, because the technical aspect that I mentioned is more important for me right now.
Mm-hmm. Do we have the right people on the call to talk about it? Like Martin, you're on build team. Have you been working on the API changes for new component model?
No, that's Robert and Mikola.
Yeah.
Yeah, hello. So yeah, we are very close to finish the document, the structure of component model. We had meeting with integration team recently to adjust last missing pieces. So the document is quite ready and almost in final state. If anyone has any questions, so feel free to ask.
Well, like I guess clearly Barak's got a concern about the way the API will be used, right? The user experience for it. Like Barak, do you have any proposals for how to tweak it or change it, or do you think it's like we need to go back to the drawing board or something like that?
Well, again, I kind of want to, I have my own ideas, but I don't want to impose them, right? Because again, other people are doing the design. If you ask me, I think we should, if we want to filter branches, we should have a filtering mechanism and not just that, the list of strings that the user have to update. And that has impacts on other places, like how we configure cell expressions in the pipelines, etc. But that's the general direction. Like I would want to be able to say, I want all the branches and I don't need to do anything, or I want all the branches that start with V or something like that. And then where the resulting experience is that if I create such a branch, assuming it already creates the pipeline as code files in it because I branch it off a branch that contains them, then everything just runs as soon as I send a PR in, except maybe releases, right? We want maybe a manual gate for the first release from a certain particular branch, probably. So that's my desire for this, but probably a lot of details to iron out. So this is why I don't want to try to do this like this.
Ryan, did you want to respond?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I was going to say, I was considering something like this in relation to the new component groups and the way that they are tested. And I think the problem is the way we handle the GCL. So like, let's say you use your example with the all branches that start with V, and we had a V2 and a V3 branch. Well, if either of those would be considered in your example as part of the same component version. So if V2 was built, and then, we had a push job, V2 is pushed, we would push a V2 image to the GCL for all component groups that have this component version. Then V3 is built, we overwrite that V2 image in the GCL with V3. If V2 is built again, we overwrite that again. So you're not necessarily getting the same thing that you're testing every single time.
I think I hear what you're saying, Ryan. So what I think I heard Barak say is he would prefer, you didn't use this word, Barak, but for there to be like patterns that appear on the component spec instead of explicit lists of branches, so that you could, when you want to go to V4 in your project, you just do it in your Git branch and you don't need to update Konflux resources. But I don't know, what I heard you say, Ryan, was that like the description in the group spec, if
I get it. So I was
that
thinking
were a pattern, then you would get these new problems about the GCL, and you
yeah,
would.
So I thought Barak's proposal was that we would have for a single component version, you could have a pattern that matches multiple branches.
Yeah.
It sounds like you would have a pattern that automatically generates component branches or component versions for you. Okay,
Yeah,
that makes more sense.
That's the proposal. And so, like, let's say you're in a single component with multiple branches, single group world, and you've got a V1, and you have a pattern for V star on your component, and you go and create a V2 branch in your Git repo and do a push. Your group would have the V1 branch, let's say, hard coded on the group, and you wouldn't automatically get a group for V2, I think, unless you went and manually created one. Or at least I didn't hear that in Barak's idea that you would. The automatic creation of groups, I think, is not proposed. Is that true, Barak?
It's a different mechanism, but yeah, in another way to say it is that we infer the version from the branch, essentially. So a different branch generally means a different version, but we just don't want to have the user have to specify and wire up everything. Whether you can, I think automated group creation is something the integration team is looking at. So assuming we manage to do what I'm saying with branches, we'll probably would be interested to also have like automated version group creation one way or another, but that's an aspect I didn't really think too deeply about yet, because we didn't solve that thing yet.
Okay. Kruda.
Yeah, this to me sounds like a next step after we implement the initial way we handle application, the new component groups. Like this feels like a great to have, but maybe not the main point of the re-architecture that we're currently doing.
Kruda, can you clarify? Are you talking about like automatic group creation, or are you talking about the patterns on the component spec?
The automated group creation, although it could go hand in hand with the automated component spec, depending how we want to cut it. But definitely the automated groups creation feels like it could be a follow-up feature.
Okay.
Yeah, to me it also sounds like a separate feature. So my proposal is to implement the first variant of it, and then we can try to get some feedback and do some improvements. So we will see better, I believe.
There's one more thing that I think we're going to need to keep in mind. It's not necessarily an endorsement of one model versus the other, but we kind of have a trade-off with if users have to explicitly specify new versions, it makes it very clear what's being tested and when and how. Whereas the pattern-based mechanism requires users intervene manually less in their CI systems, but it's a little bit more opaque as to what branches are being tested and built when. Given that one of Adam's like main desires for this design was that it be very simple and easy to understand for users, I think we should if we look into this, make sure that we're make sure that whichever one we pursue, users think that's the easiest to understand.
My gut on it is that, like, again, thinking about it is we have our core set of proposals, let's call it base, that is proposed in the component spec and the group spec designs right now. Having patterns for the component spec being one feature and having automatic group creation being yet another feature. The automatic group creation seems risky and like hard to me. Like, especially if you have a project that's composed of multiple components that don't share common branch names or versions. Like, yeah, I want to use version 3.2 of this project and version 1.0 of this project, and these make, you know, version 5 of my product. Like, figuring out when you want to make version 6 when your branch is changing the project seems impossible. So I definitely save that for another day. Maybe we can figure out something we can do there. But the feature in the middle about having patterns on the component spec, that doesn't feel as complicated to me. Like I guess I don't know, like, Mikola, like, what would it do? Does it make anything else about the current design for the controller fall apart? Do you lose some ability if you permit patterns in the component spec? Does it make anything hard for the integration service if we had that on day 0?
Well, I didn't get completely the question. So for build service, currently we expect that they, like, component versions of branches will be added manually. So basically for build service, it doesn't much matter if some automation would add them. And build service will proceed with onboarding according to the settings. So users could automate pull request creation or just declare that pull request is not needed, and it will just configure webhooks and all the resources in cluster silently. So, like, on build service side, we are ready for such automation if it will be done externally, or could be as well part of build service, but yeah, it's architectural design, so we should think more on this, I believe, because, like, handling, like, some watchers and other stuff, it should be designed properly and securely.
Brock, you got your...
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I was at the top, if it's 0 based or 1 based, the voting thing. All right. Yeah, I'm trying to refer to the point of ease of use or simplicity. So the thing about this is a bike shading kind of thing, right? You know, from my point of view, ease of use means I need to put less YAML, to write less YAML, right? You can say, right, but that needs simplicity, so it's harder to understand. You know, we can argue about this endlessly. So it's a hard point. I do think the pattern of automatically handling branches is kind of common. I mean, you know, most of other CI systems, if you create a branch and the branch contains CI configuration, then you get pipelines running for that new branch. And you can kind of use the branch name in various places. You can also see it for container registries, right? Most of them is a feature where you can have tagging based on the branch name, and it's usually the default. You know, as soon as you attach a repo, all the branches and tags in your repo get, you know, when they get updated, you get built for them that are tagged with the branch name or tag name. So I don't think it would be that surprising for users. But again, this is a bike shed kind of thing. Like, we could argue this. With regard to multiple component, you know, organizations with multiple components and versions that span all of them, given the kind of efforts they need to make every time they create a new version and the frequently in which they would need to do this, I think, you know, they would prefer to have automation, and they would be willing to rename their branches, right? To align the branches in order to make that happen. But just, you know, consider CNV with their 20-something components, and they need to have a hotfix release fixing 5 of those. They wouldn't mind renaming branches to make that happen quickly. So So, well, again, those are backshed opinions, right? So,
I think what do you guys think about this idea? What if so component spec currently has an explicit list of branches? What if that was moved to the status of component so that end users can't write there? On day 0, we also keep it in the spec where the user writes it explicitly, and you get the same APIs today, but the build service controller copies it to the status whenever there's a change. And the only point of doing that is that anything else that needs to read that always reads it from the status. This creates an opportunity then in a later design where you could add branch patterns as an alternative way for the user to express their intent in the spec. And build service controller would be responsible for then, this is where it gets tricky. When do you add new branches to the status? I guess when it sees pipeline runs that come in to expand the list of
the
branches.
question is, what needs to read the branches?
That's a good question.
Well, regarding that status idea, first build service is already using status, and if user requests to onboard a new version, so after successful onboard, it appears in status, or even if it's unsuccessful, so there is still that version in status, but with errors and stuff. So build service uses status to track actual request and how it ended. So ideally it one-to-one match. As the same when user deletes a branch, or better we say version, to avoid confusion with Git branch, because we have monorepo scenario when we have different versions. Well, potentially we could have it in the same branch, but in different folders. So every version, if a user wants to delete it, user deletes it from spec, and build service then sees by this. Like it's not in spec, but it's in status. So it's already used. And second, according to philosophy of operators and Kubernetes, status should be updated only by controllers. Users shouldn't interview with it in any way. So better to go with spec only.
Oh, maybe you misunderstood me, Mikola. I meant to respect that philosophy pattern exactly. That's why I was suggesting moving it to status. If the user wouldn't write it there, it would be both in spec and in status, and the user would only write it to spec, and build service would just copy it to status. But then to Barak's question, what needs the list of branches? Let's assume it's the UI. Let's assume it's integration service. Maybe they don't need it. Just assume it for a second. They would always read it from status. And so then this gives us the flexibility to add Barak's patterns in the spec in the future, and build service would then have to grow some logic to be expanding the explicit list in the status of what it has actually seen come in as builds that match those branches.
So basically, you're suggesting the status will be populated by looking at the pipeline as code runs. All right.
Yeah,
so just the temporary cache for the UI to be able to show this.
Yeah. And sorry, Ryan, I know you got your hand up. And just to sell my idea a little bit more, this would let us, it's a small tweak that would let Mikola and his team's design go forward pretty much as planned without having to support Barak's change, but it creates the space to allow Barak's feature shortly after without disrupting any other integrations.
A couple things. First of all, if we do this, so right now, the build service was planning on using version names, or like names for each component version. And that was what the integration service was going to use as the reference point for component versions in the component groups. Should we switch back to using the branches as the names?
I didn't know that detail. Interesting.
Well, in fact, yes, we allow users to give a beautiful name for component version. So, but like the revision Git branch is immutable in the end in that item, and we can potentially onboard like a new version. We will just populate the name the same as Git branch. It might not look that beautiful, a version like XYZ or whatever, but yeah, it would be just Git branch, so nothing is broken.
But in order to support Brock's proposal, users wouldn't be specifically naming their versions.
I think that's right. Like you could have two classes of users, one who provide an explicit list and one who do not. The ones who provide an explicit list can have beautiful names if they want them. The ones who do not and are using patterns automatically just get the branch name as their beautiful name. So the API always has the beautiful name in it, but it just so happens to be the branch name for people who don't care for that.
Okay, that makes sense. And then the integration service can support either.
Yeah. And integration service wouldn't even know which category they're in because it's just looking at status, the status block of the component spec. Make sense?
Yeah. The second point I had, unless Andrew or Barak, did you want to comment on the first point?
I mean, I think two things I want to say. One of them might be related to this. I mean, one of the things that we've focused on in the past or been concerned about in the past is coupling. If the integration service depends on that component CR, then you're going to be coupled between these different controllers. What is it that would be required to, like, if the build service is getting the status from the pipeline runs, is that something that the integration service could just get from the pipeline runs as well, and so that you don't have coupling? There's consistency drift issue, but I guess my other comment that I was going to say is related as well. Related to Brock's statement in the past, a lot of CI systems, you just create a new branch and then you have things automatically starting running, and that's beautiful and great. A lot of those CI systems are focused on individual builds. It doesn't have this higher level orchestration of here's individual builds, but they actually belong together. And so I think that getting builds working so that you create a branch and the build automatically works, like that is something that seems very tractable and seems very intuitive. But this higher level concept of you have all these builds going and now I'm going to group them together into specific sets in which I'm going to do more things with or are related to each other more, that becomes harder to do without specific user input. And so I think that we can it seems reasonable to require some input there from users in order to make sure that the auto intention is the same as the user intention. And I know that we have some work that people are thinking about for like an issues dashboard type situation, and maybe you can leverage that for saying, hey, we notice that there's new builds here which aren't in some group, and like maybe within that there's even some kind of auto remediation if like further down the line you want to do it, like, oh well, the dashboard saying we think it might belong in this group, do you want to add it? Or I mean, we've maybe users don't want the system to define the groups, and instead they have these components that are group defining, like you have a Helm chart or you have operator bundle. And so then in that situation, all the user wants is these builds to be triggered, and then they have their own individual process of defining these groups.
And that kind of actually circles us back to custom snapshot creation for component groups. But going back to your first point, regarding the upstreaming, the integration service could absolutely pull the branch from the pipeline run. And maybe we should do that. The potential issue here is kind of the hand-holding stuff we were talking about the other day, where if right in the current model, if a user deletes a component version from their component, we can recognize that and we can warn the user that, hey, these component groups have a component version that no longer exists. If we're exclusively pulling from the branch, we can never do that. So that might be fine, but it's a trade-off we have to consider.
All right, Ryan, I agree, and as well, Andrea, I also agree. Right, in a way, I'm thinking right, the automated grouping is something we might need to think about a little bit more, and I think it's a sufficiently, at least from my point of view, sufficiently good user experience if I create a branch and I get feedback from the system telling me, hey, it was built and it tests your tests, and now you need to think about where you are dealing with it, versus nothing works until I go and merge some YAML patches.
Just
my one concern about trying
go
to do this, my one concern about not looking at this right now is that we can end up with a model that will make it harder to add this later, or it will be so hard to get the new model in that then we would not have willingness to start laying more stuff on it. So, but that's more of a planning aspect than a something we need to deal with technically upfront.
Just to play devil's advocate about your comment about making YAML changes, if the user needs to make YAML changes for the component groups anyway, is it really that much more work to also change the component?
So think about it this way. How soon can you give them feedback that branching worked, right? I mean, if they need to fiddle with a bunch of stuff and nothing works and they get no feedback versus they created the branch, they send in a patch to update their version.yaml file in their repo for their build script, and the build passes or fails and they have something to work on, right? So it's much more feedbacky situation. So I prefer the second situation, where the system tells me whether I'm on the right path or not as soon as it can, as opposed to me having to get all the configuration right everywhere just for something to run.
I just wanted to ask Barak, how do you feel about the change I was proposing? Does it give enough room to support what you'd like to do? Because I want to balance the two things. That we started talking about the design in December of last year. We had, we came to a decision in January, struggled through February, and I can't believe that it's October and we're still not done. So I would love to, and I could tell I was sensing frustration on Nikola's countenance when he was talking about where the doc is. It's ready, it's almost done. I don't want to disrupt it as much as we can, but I'm really sympathetic to the idea that we don't want to have users manage more YAML than they already need to. It's a pain in the butt. To Brian's devil's advocate comment, I think I like the idea that if I could just add new branches without having to update my components. The groups are another story because they're about I think Andrew was commenting on it. They're how I want to pull my components together, and there's just a lot of complexity and power that we offer there. Doing that automatically, to me, I'm skeptical of. Maybe we'll find a way. But anyways, back to my original question, Barak. Is the change enough to create the space that you to get what you'd like to be able to see?
Sounds like it. Again, I'm not completely sure because it alludes to some details of the design that maybe I'm not completely understand. So maybe Mikola's or Kruno's opinion about this, whether you think we can layer out branch templating or automated branching later on, whether that seems feasible or not. You guys tell me.
Well, so despite our document is almost ready, so we're still open to any improvements and suggestions. So just we don't want to like take an unknown route in this. So before introducing some change, I believe it should be evaluated, especially if it's touching a lot of user experience and the crucial flow we have now. So we can discuss it more definitely. Second, regarding the branching itself, so I still not sure that automatic creation of branches is a good idea, because we still can do something implicitly behind the user backs, and that's could introduce a lot of confusion from user side. Like first, let's try to think how often users would add a new version of their products. So it's quite rare operation. Let's assume it's once a month, right? So, okay, okay, Barak, maybe you have use case, okay. And moreover, if we have onboarded branch and we would like to have a patch, so creating a new branch and submitting pull request will already trigger the pull request build. So for just trying things out, it will work. Current flow, and yeah, about confusion, so I'm 50-50 still. So Barak, please go on with your use case. I'm curious.
So, you know, at least for their current system, like it's not enough to create a new branch and start sending PRs into your code, because you also need to fix the set of expressions in the pipeline. And those little details are things I'm hoping we can kind of iron out. You know, maybe we can remove the cell expressions or make them a little bit broader. But if we start introducing new stuff like like mandatory version labels in the pipeline, then it brings us back to the point where you have to update the pipeline code just to make it run, which is something I'm trying to avoid. The other thing is I'm worried if there are all kinds of other aspects where we will have assumptions baked in about the validity of the list of branches in the CR that would make other things not work, you know, all kinds of couplings between image service and other things. Or I just don't know all the relationships between the things. I'm looking at this CR and I'm saying that's supposed to be the authoritative list. Then when it misaligned with the relist in the user's repo, you know, that seems to trigger problems. Maybe I'm worried for nothing, but that's just how it looks for me.
And what about use cases about version adding quite often something?
Well, we had teams come to us and say they want to version every week, and those are the normal versions. And then they also have on top of that hotfix versions where they have like 2 days where they need to build a few components and get everything out the door on a customer site. So versioning is something that happens way more frequently than you would realize. And huge versions, you know, multi-component versions of full products. Yeah, this is what the teams are doing. And they're looking into CI systems as a way to facilitate this. So we get a lot of hate for that not working very smoothly for them.
Okay. Well, personally, to me, I would still prefer to do it manual, but that's my opinion. So definitely people might want to have an automation here. But at the same time, it could have additional load on the system. If we try to monitor stuff, so there are multiple ways how we can do it, like listening events from Git system or watching pipeline runs. Like anyway, both of them might be quite expensive in the end in terms of resources. Yeah, and so what else? Yeah, with this automatic branching, there could be tricky situations with monorepos, because if currently we are sticking to branch and users could have many pipelines in the Tecton folder. So if we remove this binding to branch in cell expression, then every pipeline would run. So, and that's not desired solution because we want to build only one version instead of 100 versions in my component. So it would just put down the whole cluster in such use case. And yeah, we should handle monorepo scenarios. And moreover, let's imagine we solve this problem, but our automation will end here unless we take integration side and release side automated as well. So like doing really hard changes here and not be able to do everything automatically, it's passing to nowhere, because then like semi-automated process we cannot finish is no good, I believe. But yeah, okay, we need to properly analyze what we can do here. I guess it's separate stuff. Yeah, thank you. Ryan, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, I wanted to propose a change that I think might be simpler than Ralph's to support both the current proposal and Brock's proposals as a future enhancement. But Brock, is your hand up related to what Mikola was saying? Because if so, why don't you go first?
Yeah, just the aspect of monorepo, I'm not completely sure, but for me, the scenario of I have a monorepo with multiple components in it, and when I branch it, I get new versions for all those components immediately. That sounds to me like a good scenario, but maybe our definitions of monorepo are different. So, and there are probably multiple, legit definitions for multiple monorepos. So it's okay. I do want to point out that if you're pattern-based, having a strict pattern that selects a single branch, that's just, something that's included in being able to do patterns, right? Every regex could be a single string, starts with, a caret and ends with a $sign, for example. So I don't think one precludes the other. Back to you, Ryan.
All right, thanks. I'm going to share my screen real quick. I typed up some YAML as an example. So I think right now this is more or less how versions are defined in the new component model. Mikola, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. Here, I'll zoom in just in case it's a little small. But where you have versions is a map, and you have these names here, and then within that you have the actual name of the Git branch. Is that correct, Mikola?
Almost. We decided to get rid of map and just use list. But yeah, correct.
So it would look like,
yes, name and revision. Okay, let it be branch, whatever.
Okay. So if we support, sorry, there we go. So if we were to hypothetically support Brock's proposal in the future, the integration service can't rely on the version name at all. Right? We need to be looking at the branch and use that as the component version in order to determine what snapshots to create from different component groups. So I'm kind of wondering, what value does having a name here provide at all? Like, can we just have a list of revisions?
Yeah, we can. So name is just beautiful display name. We can rely on revision. However, why we introduced name, because it's easier to enforce uniqueness of the name. Because for monorepo scenario, revision would be the same. Imagine component in monorepo mode. So it will be like the same revision and different context. So it's still possible. Yes, but
so the version. So you think that the name of every version should be unique across all components?
Yes, because we need to identify build pipelines, so they should have a name in cluster, and it should be based on the component, on its version, which is revision. But if we have component name and revision the same, we need to distinguish by something else. And the only option we have here is context path. But context path is not the best way, you know, to attach even sanitized to the pipeline run name. So
I'm
that's
confused.
why we have this beautiful name, which is also should be sanitized, but anyway, it's quite different from, you know, passing the repo. So that's the reason. And
I'm confused. If you name the build pipeline based on the name of the component and the version name, why does it matter if another component has the same version name? Because wouldn't you still have two unique strings?
we need to distinguish between different components runs, like different versions.
Yeah, so you name the pipeline as like component version or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a component name is unique. So in all these versions, you know, we can't, in this list of versions, names would have to be unique, but if you had a different component, you could have the same name, same version name for that differently named component.
Yes, so
Okay, gotcha.
That's a gap.
Ryan, we got hung up on the name. You were about to suggest a proposal that was going to obviate my idea to make a copy of this in the status. And you're on mute. Ryan, you're on mute. Do you know?
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Yeah, so let's say name is optional and we rely on branch. Why do we have to copy anything to the status? We can allow users to edit their branches as they desire. The integration service, the component groups are independent from the components. So if a user deletes a branch, but there's a component group that still uses that branch to create snapshots, if an image has already been built for it, we can still create our snapshots. But you know, it doesn't matter that a user can delete or add new versions, branches, whatever. You know, so I don't think we necessarily need to port this to something that's only controlled by Konflux.
Barak, you got your hand up. Can I motivate my proposal, or do you want to go? Yeah, it's the idea is that so we currently have this list of versions with a list of explicit revisions, and the reason to copy it to the status, it like just only makes things more complicated for the first revision. But what it does is it creates an API buffer between what integration service is going to depend on to read and what the user can specify, so that in the future we can change the way that this list works. And so, for instance, today it just has versions and it's a list, and each one has a revision and a name, let's say. But in the future, we could change that API and add pattern so that Barak could have release -* or something for his, and he wants anything that's pushed to a release branch to be treated as an independent version of his component.
So,
and then
how does that change the integration service's behavior?
I think it doesn't. I think the integration service would just look at the status. In the current plans, it's looking at the spec for this list. And in my proposal, it just looks at the status for the exact same list.
But the integration service doesn't look at the spec.
Oh.
So the only reason that you know, a user can look at the spec for the component, the spec for the component group, and see that, okay, there's branches with both names in each of these things. But the integration service looks at the build pipeline run and looks at the labels in that build pipeline run, and then says, okay, does the component label and the revision label match some combination of component and version that we have in any of these component groups? And if it matches, then we'll create a snapshot. And if it doesn't, then we won't.
So my question is, what warns the user when they go to delete either a group, I guess when they try to delete a component branch and they get warned that there's a component group that refers to that? Is it the UI doing logic in the UI, or is it like an admission controller in one of the two services?
In fact, no, sorry, Ryan. In fact, nothing. because at first point we wanted to have admission webhook on build service side that would check component groups, but again, it would introduce dependency from build service on integration service, which shouldn't happen because, well, it's first tight coupling of components, which we would like to avoid. And second, we even depend on component down the road, which is wrong. So it could be like vice versa, but we shouldn't depend on descendants in the pipeline.
Mhm.
So as of now, we don't validate it, don't plan to. So users can easily add, remove anything, and build service will just drag to onboard or offboard some version.
Yeah.
A handful of engineers from the build and integration teams actually met and discussed this a few days ago. And we basically came to the conclusion that we want to maintain independence between these services, and that the best option would be to have some sort of scaffolding on top of Konflux, maybe a cron job or something like that, that could give users warnings about the component groups that have component versions that no longer exist, maybe update the issues dashboard once that's implemented, etc. Or sorry, I should say, instead of warnings, I should say update the component group status. I do want to be very clear about one thing, though, which is that the GCL for every single component group is going to be stored in the component group, which means if you build an image for a version and then that image is promoted to the GCL, if you delete that component version, we can still use that image to create snapshots for every other component version in the component group. It only becomes a problem if that image is garbage collected for whatever reason.
So like, let's imagine the scenario that the user never specified, they never update their version list in their component, but they start adding groups that refer to versions that are not declared on the component spec. Everything should just work, right? If they update their cell expression and they create the groups, things will flow through. They'll start getting warnings because of this scaffolding cron job.
It should, yeah. If we're using the branch rather than the version name, it should.
Nothing uses this list that we're arguing about.
Yeah, it starts to seem like it. Like if the only communication mechanism is actually labels on the jobs, then right, it's decoupled enough that we can forget about the list. And even we can even put the display name there, and then the user can decide whether they specified it in the component, so build service generates the YAML for them, or they just do it once and then when they branch off they change the YAML to get nice names. They change the pipeline as code YAML, which is in their repo, as opposed to some other YAML.
There's nobody from the UI team here to speak about it, and I'm trying to go, why is this has to be a reason this exists. And the beautiful name starts to come in when a user is using the UI to create a new component group. They will want to be presented with a list of branches that they might select from, and so those then being on the component makes sense. At the same time, though, we're in the process of working on that ADR to remove write access, remove write functionality from the UI, which makes that maybe moot. Yeah. Where Andrew was cheering and he had to leave for another call, we're over time. I feel like we just got to some sort of realization, but I don't want to rashly make decisions. So what do you guys think about closing the call, and we can take this offline, think, and communicate async?
Yeah, we just need to think where to do it.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like Ryan and Mikola and team are already talking. So if you guys on Slack, can you share with Barak where you're talking so that he can follow along and engage?
Yeah, so the conversations we had previously were in a meeting. So there's unfortunately not really a way to continue engaging with that, but maybe we can create a Slack thread and make sure we can hash all this stuff out.
Yeah, cool. Bruno.
And a lot of the discussions that started these meetings were in the refinement document, so there is some trace there.
Mm-hmm. That's good. Thank you. All right, let's close the call. I'll move to close the recording. I wanted to make one announcement. I added it to the end of the agenda, which is just that to look forward to next week. Paul Reiskop, who works on the RPM build functionality in Konflux, he also works on the Copper project and some other projects. I invited him to come and present on how his other projects are managing multi-cloud resources to inform the way we're thinking about multi-platform controller and potentially version 2.0 of the multi-platform controller. So we'll have a special guest next week, hopefully, if not then the week after. All right, with that, I'll shut it
We
down.
should make sure infra people are here, you know.
Yeah. They were in a meeting yesterday where we all talked about it, so I'll make sure that they can join. All right, thank you, everybody. Have a good week. Good conversation
Thank you.
today. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.